Your attention, please.
Yeah, just all the things.
Good evening, and welcome to the Northport Yacht Club. My name is Rich Boswick, and I am the Commodore. First, I would like to thank Janice Winters, Carol Alfiero, and Stephanie Quarles of the Northport Yacht Club for putting together this extravaganza, so thank you very much. Proximity to the water means a lot to all of us in this room. We are drawn to it. If that was not the case, we'd all be living in Iowa. So moving right along, we at the Northport Yacht Club are doing our part in improving the water quality of our harbor. You should have been here last week. If you saw the stuff that was out there on your way in, it was about 10 times as bad. There was this huge piece of machinery that was in our parking lot that was drilling holes down the street. But that's all part of the Northport Sewer Project. We have been a staging area for that project. Presently, the Northport Yacht Club spends a tremendous amount of money each year pumping our cesspools, and no doubt that has probably been leaching nitrogens into the harbor. As of this coming October, that will cease. We'll be hooking up to the system on Bluff Point Road. We will just be another piece of the puzzle in improving our overall water quality. Tonight, our speakers will inform us, teach us, and lead us into the process of improving our water quality so we all don't have to move to Iowa. So please enjoy the evening and participate in the proceedings. Take this home with you, and there's something that we all can do. So thank you very much and have a great evening. And now I'd like to introduce Janice, Carol. Thank you.
Together. Good evening. My name is Carol Alfiero, and I am co-chair of the Women's Committee as well as the Board of Governor of the Northport Yacht Club. We're thrilled to have all of you with us this evening. Just to give you a little background, this event was spearheaded 5 years ago by our Women's Committee in collaboration with the Greater Huntington Council of Yacht and Boating Clubs. And as a boating community, this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. Hence the reason we've been so passionate about making this an annual event. During the summertime, our backyard is right there. So it's the Northport Bay, Huntington Bay, Sound, all of the waters surrounding us. Our vision was to bring people together from government, education, and the community to discuss and learn not only about the quality of our water, but what we can do together to improve it. We've been fortunate to continue to have such a distinguished panel of speakers with us. Each year, we talk about nitrogen levels, dredging, and sewers. Who knew these would have come to be such exciting topics? So tonight, we will learn not only about the quality of water in our bays, but what government and universities are doing to improve it. At this time, I'd like to introduce my co-chair, Janice Winter, who's going to review the current legislation for our waterways.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Carol. I'm proud to personally say that the image that you see on the monitor right there is a whale that I saw off of New York Harbor, right off of Breezy Point. So there were 2 humpback whales that we saw that day and a pod of 70 dolphin that we got to see. It was amazing. So our legislature now is implementing some legislation to keep these mammals healthy and in our waterways. So I'm just going to talk to you about a little bit of new legislation that's happening. It's not all approved, but it's coming forward. I just felt that everyone should be aware of it. Sunscreens. Some of the UVA absorbers will be banned in 2021. So what does that mean? That means today, they're mostly in Hawaii and Key West, but companies are not going to make sunscreens just for Hawaii and Key West. They're going to make sunscreens for everyone. So with UVA absorbers, there's one that they feel is hurting the coral reefs. It's going to be removed. It's going to be changed, so your sunscreen's going to be changed. So what I would recommend is that you definitely wear sunscreen, of course, because the number of cancer that's happening in the United States is approximately 9,500 Americans are diagnosed with skin cancer every day. And that's nearly 3.5 million people per year. So of course sunscreen is important. If you don't have sunscreen, of course wear protective clothing out on the boats. So from there, the New York State Senate has also launched the blocking of any offshore drilling activities on the state's coastline. So that happened on February 5th. And with this legislation, our Senate hopes it will protect the waterways and the wildlife and will continue New York's mission to move forward in using cleaner, renewable energy resources. Also on February 5th, the New York State Senate passed legislation to protect overfishing of the manhunted fish, or what is commonly known as bunker. With this legislation, they hope to restore the abundance of life along our coast and in the Hudson Bay. Bunker are food sources for the whale, dolphin, striped bass, and other species that they hope will rebound. Last year, Dr. Spencer spoke and helped spearhead the legislation to reduce the single use of plastic bags. This legislation has been successful and has reduced plastic bag and paper bag consumption for over 1 billion bags. It's amazing. So due to this, Suffolk County has experienced less bags washing up on our shores, on the sides of our roadways, and getting into our food stream. New York State is following this with a statewide ban on plastic bags to be implemented March 1st of 2020.
A little more excitement.
So recent estimates suggest that 91% of the plastic that's created by consumers isn't recycled. And scientists are studying plastic pollution problems and have been horrified by the sheer amount of plastic in our environment. It is estimated that 5 trillion pieces of plastic are in our oceans and in our waterways. Where does it all end up? Well, this is a picture of the sea in the Caribbean. So that is quite amazing, and what is found, and I found very interesting, is that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association did a 2-year study to discover that the source of microplastic pollution accumulated in the Gulf of Mexico was found that more than 80% of the microplastic found in the oceans are actually microfibers from synthetic clothing. So not only do we have to do our part in terms of recycling, but also in terms of what we wear and the types of clothes that we choose to wear. What you see on the bottom right is a product from S.E. Johnson. It's everyone has it probably. It's Windex, but their new packaging that's going to come out next month for their Windex with vinegar is going to be using recycled package from the ocean plastic, specifically from Haiti, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So some companies are really taking an approach to make a difference. So now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Quarles, and she's going to introduce our esteemed panelists and the dignitaries in the room.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to recognize all the government officials and dignitaries that are in attendance here today. And I will start with Mr. Lupinacci. Is he here? I didn't see him come in, but Chad Lupinacci was going to be attending. I don't see him here. Okay, well, maybe he'll be later. I'd like to, Joan Sergel, councilman for the town of Huntington. Mark Hutchison, the town of Huntington. Andrew Reyes, New York State Assemblyman. Greg Letica, Village of Ashbroken Bay. We also have Don Spada here from the Deputy Director of Maritime Services for the town of Huntington. We have someone here from the Lighthouse, Frank DeLuca. And Julian Guthman as a receiver of taxes for the town of Huntington. And I think I got them all. Anybody that I hear that I didn't see that would like to be recognized? Okay. All right, I want to thank you all for attending and for showing your interest in this very important topic. And thanks to all the speakers for all the work they've done and do to improve our water quality and for being here today. This is a marvelous panel, and I'm just so glad that they're here today, and I'm sure we're all going to learn an awful lot today from them all. For the sake of brevity, I ask that you save your questions until the end of the presentations. We also to save time, I'm going to introduce all of the speakers now, rather than in between the presentations. So I will do that and start right here. So our keynote speaker is Professor Christopher Gobler, Endowed Chair of the Coastal Ecology and Conservation at SUNY School of Maritime and Atmospheric Services. Dr. Gobler is a leader in his field and has won many, many awards for his contributions to water quality. We are really honored to have him here. He is a member of the Northport Water Quality Protection Committee as well, and his research has contributed to improving the Huntington and Northport Bay complex of water. Thank you. Is director of Save the Sound, a Connecticut-based nonprofit organization. Tracy has been working to protect, preserve, and restore Long Island Sound for almost 12 years. She leads studies measuring water quality in the Long Island Sound. We're grateful for her to be here as well. Dorian is the Suffolk County Director of Sustainability and Chief Recovery Officer. Dorian has overseen recovery and mitigation after Superstorm Sandy, navigated a major water quality initiative for Suffolk called Reclaim Our Waters, and helped secure a substantial amount of federal funds. Ian Milligan is our Northport Village Trustee and Commissioner of Waterways and Wastewater, and he's also Commodore of the Greater Huntington Council of Yacht and Boating Clubs, and is a longtime resident of Northport. Adrienne Esposito is Executive Director, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, also known as CCE, which was formed in 1985 by a small group of concerned citizens and has become a very formidable force for our environment and our protection of the environment. Adrienne has worked on numerous campaigns to protect our environment and engage the public in environmental studies and issues. Adrienne is co-chair with Supervisor Lupinacci of the Northport Water Quality Protection Committee. Please welcome our distinguished panel.
Okay, good evening everyone. Pleasure to be here again. I think I missed last year, but I'm back. Good to see you all. And tomorrow night in Southampton, if you didn't get enough for me tonight, you can come out to Southampton to see a similar talk. I call it the State of the Bays. But I've sort of tailored this specifically towards Northport. And I have a little bit of climate change information here as well that becomes very important for water quality. So we're all quite familiar with the scenario here in Suffolk County with regards to population changes and how the quality of our drinking water and our groundwater has changed over time.
Which one?
Anyway, I don't need a point. Who needs a point? Not a problem. If you look at the figure on the right, you can see the growing levels of nitrogen in the groundwater underneath Suffolk County since about 1980. And about a decade ago, we'd wonder why that was happening, but there's been a series of studies done over and over again over the last decade that has clearly identified the fact that wastewater is the largest source of nitrogen to our groundwater in Suffolk County. There is a contribution from fertilizer, but it's smaller compared to wastewater. And we know also that the overloading of nitrogen has led to a whole series of what we call water quality impairments all across Suffolk County. This is a map that I generated at the end of last summer, but anywhere you see a circle there, that indicates a different type of harmful algal bloom or an area where the oxygen levels are lower than the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation says that they should be. You may not know what harmful algal blooms are, so I'll just give a quick primer on that now. Currently on Long Island, we have 6 different types of these harmful algal blooms. There's a growth of either a macroalgae, like a seaweed, but more commonly a microalgae that you can't even see. That could be either on the left, the 3 types that are a human health threat because these organisms make toxins, and on the right, ones that thankfully are not harmful to us, but can be highly damaging to ecosystems, killing fish or shellfish. Now, as it turns out, these events are not necessarily new to Long Island, and if we go back and look at the last, say, 70 years or so across Long Island, we know that actually in the 1950s there was something called green tides that occurred in Moriches Bay. They were harmful to oysters. But there's been a change in recent years. So in 1985 we started having brown tides across the east end and south shore of Long Island. Shortly thereafter we started seeing the overgrowth of seaweeds in many bays, harbors, and estuaries. In about the year 2000, a little bit thereafter, we started seeing in freshwater bodies toxic, what we call blue-green algae, the emergence of rust tides this century, and then also two of the most dangerous harmful algae, types that make marine harmful algae that make toxins that are a human health threat. And those last two, what I'm calling PSP and DSP, that's paralytic shellfish poisoning, diuretic shellfish poisoning, were both discovered first, for the first time, here in Northport Harbor and Northport Bay. Now, what's of interest is that if you look at the period between 1950s and this recent outbreak of harmful algal blooms, and you looked at what was happening on Long Island at that time, you'd find out that the decades between those events are when we had the highest record landings of hard clams and the highest record landings of bay scallops. And you've probably heard the statistics, but that hard clam fishery was supplying the majority of hard clams, the hard clams out of Great South Bay at that time provided the majority of hard clams to the entire nation. And at the same time, the bay scallop fishery was the largest bay scallop fishery on the east coast of the United States. This is an organism that lives from Maine all the way down to Florida. But that all changed starting in 1985, and these fisheries are now at only a fraction. In fact, you can see this here. Since 1980, this is the change in the landings of clams, oysters, scallops, and mussels, down somewhere between 70 and 95%, depending on the species, with all direct or indirect links to these harmful algal blooms. I'm not going to go through all the research right now, but there are plenty of publications that demonstrate that more nitrogen makes these harmful algal blooms either more intense or more toxic. And so I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'll start with this Alexander. I've already mentioned paralytic shellfish poisoning. So that organism on the left, again, discovered first here in Northport Harbor in 2006, makes that compound on the right called saxitoxin. That is a neurotoxin. That compound is 1,000 times more potent than cyanide. And it gets in shellfish every year here in Long Island. And if you look at that compound, I don't know, do we have any organic chemists in the room? No? But if you look at that compound and you see the letter N, the reason you see the letter N is this is a nitrogen-rich compound. So not only does nitrogen make this organism grow faster, like a plant would grow faster with more nitrogen, it allows the organism to make significantly more toxin, and it works in reverse. Less nitrogen, the organism makes less toxin. It's a little bit of a complicated topic, but it's a reality. It's been shown globally. Before I move forward, I just want to acknowledge someone that we lost in the last year, a gentleman named Bill Hasbeck. He worked for the DEC. He was in charge of shellfish monitoring for things like PSP. And in fact, he was the individual first rang I remember when he called me on Memorial Day 2006 and said, "Chris, can you look at a sample? We think we've got some toxic dinoflagellus in there." His untimely passing occurred, unfortunately, this past November, but he was really important for the state in protecting public health when it comes to paralytic shellfish poisoning. This organism is widespread all across Long Island, and if you look specifically in Northport, you see a lot of red dots. That's because we've had some very intense events in Northport over the last decade or so. This is a serious event. So in Alaska, they've had in the last decade people pass away from exposure to saxitoxin in shellfish. And just in January, there was an event in England where actually dogs ate shellfish with paralytic shellfish, with the toxins, the saxitoxins, and those dogs perished. So it's a serious issue, and sometimes a surprising issue. We had a die-off of turtles, and over 200 turtles died in the Riverhead area a few years ago, and we had no idea what the cause was, but doing some detective work with some other scientists, we were able to determine it was due to this paralytic shellfish poison. So last year, unfortunately, we had the return of paralytic shellfish poisoning to Northport Harbor. It was the first time there had been a closure in this region in 5 years. So we actually had an extended period where there had not been a closure that happened right after the upgrade of the sewage treatment plant. And I do think there's a linkage there, but I think the fact that it's back, coupled with the science that's been done over this time, just shows that the sewage treatment plant is important for sure, but there's also a lot of septic tanks and cesspools that are also contributing a lot of nitrogen that need to be addressed for this to probably be fully eradicated. And just next door, last year was the first year there was a PSP event in Huntington Harbor. And for years people said, well, why doesn't it happen in Huntington Harbor? It happens here in Northport. They look kind of similar. They both have a sewage treatment plant. It finally did happen there. And I won't get into the details, but the one issue is that once these events happen once, you really need to work to eradicate it because they form these seeds that follow the bottom of the bay and then reemerge every year. Beyond harmful algal blooms, I just want to very quickly emphasize some water quality monitoring that we do. We do with News 12 in the summer. Every Thursday for the last 5 years, we've had weather forecasts that include a water quality index report delivered by Bill Corbell on Thursday nights. Replays on the half an hour, I think from 5:30 and then all through the night. There's a lot that goes into those reports, but I want to just for now focus on oxygen. As you can imagine, oxygen is pretty important in our bays and estuaries. All marine life needs oxygen to breathe, except for bacteria. And it's one of those water quality parameters where there's actually a solid standard. That is to say that the DEC gives you very precise numbers. They really want to see more than 4.8 milligrams per liter. They never want to see less than 3 milligrams per liter. And so now we have 5 years of data monitoring over 30 sites across Long Island where we can consider what Long Island's water oxygen levels look like during the summer. And it's not a pretty picture, folks, just to be perfectly honest. Of the 30 sites, we have 17 that the mean minimum oxygen standard, so we take the minimum oxygen for the summer for each year and take the average there, it falls below the 3 milligram per liter standard. We've got 6 that falls below the 4.8, and actually of the 30 sites, only 6 that achieve that year after year. And you can see I've highlighted Northport Harbor falls really towards the bottom even of the lower ones. It's a low oxygen area. And again, that's directly linked to nitrogen loading. And of course, oxygen matters, right? If you didn't know, we've had some, I don't know what else to call it, but catastrophic fish kills in the last several years. Oops. One in Riverhead that was over 500,000 fish. One in the Shinnecock Canal the year after that. People have estimated almost 10 million fish died in those schools. And they were menhaden, incidentally. We talked about how important menhaden are to protect. They can be very sensitive to low oxygen. And beyond fish, we've done studies recently looking at oysters. Oysters are emerging as an important aquaculture target here on Long Island and looking at how they do in different regions of Long Island with different levels of oxygen. And in 2 consecutive years, what we found is that the growth rates of the oysters are directly correlated to the amount of oxygen in the water. So these findings that we're violating the oxygen standards have direct implications for how well our marine life is going to do and also our aquaculture will perform as well. Just to very briefly talk about climate change, oftentimes when, I don't know what you think about, but sometimes when I think about climate change, I think, oh, well, that's something far in the future. But the fact of the matter is we've already had a decent amount of climate change. So this is just a map off of the Weather Channel from last summer. But if you look at Long Island Sound, where we are right now, in September, the temperatures were 8 to 10 degrees above average, which is enormous for a water body. It's easy to have a day that, oh wow, it's 10 degrees above average. It takes a while for water to heat up. And for it to be that temperature in September, that just shows you that was a really hot summer. But that's a trend that's been going forward. This is a little bit of a complex data set. What this shows is the 35-year trend in summer temperatures in the waters around Long Island, so including Long Island Sound and also the South Shore, taking the average for June, July, and August. And this is based on satellite, so it's actually a measurement almost every day. And you can see what the trends are. We're just in a new realm. This rate of change is 3 times faster than the global average. So during summer, we're warming up very quickly. And again, this is the thing about climate change that's important to recognize. there are these predictions, oh, we're going to warm up by X number of degrees. That's the global average. You know, some places get lucky and won't warm up at all. And in fact, some seasons, for example, our winters, haven't really warmed too much. But you can see our summers really are getting hotter. There are projections that through the century will continue to warm. And that has consequences. I won't go into the details here, but this is a heat map of something we call rust tide, and just shows how long the bloom season has changed since 1982. You can see we're in the red zone here. The season of opportunity for this harmful algal bloom is now 40 days longer than it was in 1982. The very last thing I'll talk about with regard to climate change is rainfall. If you didn't know, our rainfall patterns are changing. Now, the total amount of rainfall we're getting isn't that different, but as you can see from this figure here, we're getting more of what they call heavy downpours. And you know, if you've been around here, you kind of know that. Like, particularly in the summer, we get these tropical deluges of more than an inch of rain. And those deliver a lot of nutrients to our coastal waters. And that's already happened. So it's a 71% increase during the 20th century. There's one scientific paper that really has caught my eye in the last year or so. It's from these scientists from Stanford University, projecting how rainfall will change in the future. So they project a 20% increase in rainfall, but one thing that really caught my eye in this paper is the fact that the more rainfall is projected to increase nitrogen loading by 33% through the next century. And that's without anything else changing. So if we do nothing else, we just, climate change happens, we don't deal with nitrogen at all, nitrogen loading is going to go up by 33%. You can see this is specifically, it says for the Northeast. So that's a big amount, and I'll just show you this quick figure here. You can see where we are in the darker color orange there. This is just showing that through the 20th century, the rainfall-induced precipitation delivering nitrogen is going to increase by a lot. And their models that they determining this extended right to Long Island. And so when I see this, I mean, one thing you could do is see this and say, we're doomed. But here's the thing. This is the way I think about this. We're not on our own able to change climate change. We can't address that on our own right here in Long Island. And so we need to double down on the things that we can address, which is like the local nitrogen loading rates, to make ourselves more resilient when this climate change does happen. So I'm just going to move forward now and just talk about some nitrogen mitigation efforts that are going on, and specifically want to talk about something called the New York State Center for Clean Water Technology. I'm the director of that center. It runs out of Stony Brook University. And I just want to share with you some things that we're doing towards addressing the nitrogen loading issues. You can see our goal is 10-10-30. That goal means that we want to create new septic systems that have less than 10 milligrams per liter effluent, that will cost less than $10,000, and that will last 30 years. And as you'll see, or at least 30 years, hopefully longer. And I'll say that we've actually this is a goal, we just started in 2015. We've really already achieved 2 of our goals. The last one is to get that $10,000 mark. But let me show you what we're up to. As I think you know, here in Suffolk County, most homes are equipped with either just a cesspool and leaching rings or a septic tank attached to a leaching pool. And in either case, both of them do the same thing. The solids are retained, the liquids, where all the nitrogen is, gets delivered directly to the groundwater. That's what they're made to do, and they do a very good job of that. So I'm going to mention, just talk very quickly about something we've made called nitrogen-reducing biofilters, which are meant to be attached to existing systems to get the nitrogen levels down lower. In 3 dimensions, essentially what they are is using something called a drain field, which is a series of perforated PVC pipes that are on top of a layer of sand and wood chips. And looking at what they do, that sand layer performs a chemical reaction, converting ammonium to nitrate. That lower layer converts that nitrate to nitrogen gas, which is 80% of our atmosphere anyway, and essentially then getting the nitrogen out of the water. And we've got 3 different versions of these, one of which is lined at the bottom, another of which has no liner whatsoever, and a third system where it's actually just the sand layer that then goes to what we call a wood chip box or wood chip tank, has a shallower profile, and then allows those wood chips to be accessed in the event that they clog or if they start to break down. And working with Suffolk County, we'll hear from the great program the county's running momentarily from Dorian Dale. We've been partnering, and we're in what they're called their experimental program for putting these systems in 9 different locations across Suffolk County. I have data here on the first 3 online systems that we've installed. And so we installed our last one last spring. So the top dots are the influent, the bottom dots are the effluent, and on average over about the last year they've been averaging about 7 milligrams per liter. The county wants to see less than 19. I told you we want to see less than 10, so we're actually achieving both marks. Our second system, the line system, so far it's just in 1 home, but we'll by the end of May we'll be at 3, has been also performing even better, and has a mean effluent of 5 milligrams per liter. So these systems are doing quite well. Again, Dorian Dale will tell us about the county system, but we compare the effluent in our systems to the ones that exist. We have some of the lowest or the lowest effluent thus far. It's early in the game, but so far our systems are performing quite well. And beyond nitrogen, I want to point out that we're also measuring other things that come out of wastewater, because beyond contamination with nitrogen, as I'm sure you imagine, there are lots of other things in wastewater streams to be concerned with. Pharmaceuticals, personal care products, drugs. And so what this table shows is a series of about a dozen different compounds that we've measured. And the bottom line is, if you look at the yellow box with the red around it on the far right there, what essentially this shows is that we're removing 90% or more of all of these compounds. This is actually better removal than a sewage treatment plant achieves. So beyond nitrogen, these are also quite effective at removing other compounds of concern. And so I mentioned we're in the experimental phase for these systems with Suffolk County. We hope next year to be in the piloting phase, and then by 2021 we may be provisionally approved for hopeful more widespread installation. We're working on some other systems as well. We've constructed wetlands, for example. If you look at the picture on the right, these can be a beautiful design, and they're meant specifically to have multiple modes for removing nitrogen from wastewater. We've installed one of these at a test facility in Massachusetts that has both a wetlands but also what we call some polishing units. The wetlands themselves are getting the nitrogen down to about 20 milligrams per liter, which is close to the county standard, but the polishing step gets it down even lower, and are really quite effective, and we're looking forward. We have one of these now installed in Suffolk County as well. We want to get these into the piloting program also. And the last treatment technology I'll mention are permeable reactive barriers. These are essentially the same idea of the wood chips that remove the nitrogen, being installed not horizontally underneath a wastewater system, but rather instead being installed vertically to intercept groundwater before it enters a bay, harbor, or estuary, but performs the same activity as the nitrogen-reducing biofilters, that denitrification to remove the nitrogen. We've installed a test, what we call PRB, in a bulkhead on eastern Long Island in collaboration with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and been sampling that, and we've had some very good results. Again, in this case, the green is in the middle of the system, the purple is just before the water discharges out into, in this case, it's Shinnecock Bay. But in this example and many others, we're getting about 90% removal of the nitrogen. And as you know, I'm sure, bulkheads, if you look at the top photo there, wear out over time, and eventually they're replaced. And so what we're trying to talk to people about is, why not, when these things are being replaced, consider putting in one of these barriers, and that you can be not only just replacing your bulkhead, but perhaps removing nitrogen at the same time. Now, it probably won't work in every single case, but we do see a lot of potential opportunity for this, and we just got a grant from the DEC to try this in collaboration with the town of Brookhaven at Davis Park on Fire Island this summer to install another one of these. The very last thing I'm going to mention I know there's some aquaculture here in Northport, so I wanted to just tag this in because it's something that brand new that we're working on that I think is also quite exciting. I call it regenerative and restorative aquaculture. There's already a lot of shellfish aquaculture going on in Northport. Of course, bivalves filter the water, and in some cases can remove nitrogen doing that. But another component that hasn't really been explored much on Long Island has been the co-culture of seaweeds. And when co-culturing seaweeds, and on the left there are kelp, something known as sugar kelp. It's a winter seaweed, but these seaweeds, like kelp, supply oxygen to the water, which I already told you we really need, remove carbon dioxide, which is an emerging threat, remove nutrients. These seaweeds are like a sponge, and actually we have some research showing they actually can prevent harmful algal blooms. And so we have a grant that we got from the New York Farm Viability Institute. And think about that name, Farm Viability Institute. But they realized that farming, shellfish is farming, and that if farmers who are farming shellfish can also farm seaweeds, they can be making themselves more resilient against having just one crop, and also potentially improving water quality. And so here we go. Let's see if this wants to go. It doesn't, but anyway, this is supposed to be a movie, not playing, but that's perfectly fine. This is a rope of kelp installed at Rich's Bay just in January, and this is what that kelp looks like just a few months later. It's grown over 4 feet. It grows incredibly quickly, and actually, we were told by scientists across the Northeast, this will never work. The water's too shallow. And what we're proving is that actually it actually is outgrowing all the other sites in Long Island Sound. In fact, we have some out in Long Island Sound that's doing okay, but not great. Wave motion is really beating it up. So we think this has great potential. This is what we call winter seaweed. In the summer, there are many others that we've been working on that can be grown as well. So I'm done. And essentially, what I've showed you is that the overloading of nitrogen is contaminating our groundwater and a real threat to coastal ecosystems, economies, pets, human health. Reducing nitrogen will lead to improvements in many regions of Long Island, and so we need these watershed-based approaches to address nitrogen loading coming from land, and perhaps some in-the-water approaches like the aquaculture as well. I'll acknowledge the very hard work of all the people in my laboratory, and thank you for your attention. And I will introduce the director of the Save the Sound study, Tracy.
All right. Thank you, Chris. That was really informative and frightening and inspiring all at the same time. Thanks for having me here tonight. I'm going to speak mostly to the nitrogen part of this universe of concerns, water quality concerns. So, as Chris explained, this is my really quick graphic on why excess nitrogen is bad. I think we heard about that already. Too much nitrogen, feeding algae blooms, depleting oxygen, creating low oxygen hypoxic conditions, and then the detrimental impacts we heard about. Also, coastal salt marsh loss, and there's science now that shows us that increased nitrogen also supports and accelerates acidification in our waterways. Now this is a bit of good news to mix it up. This is the last Long Island Sound report card. Save the Sound publishes this every 2 years. There are a bunch of them here. If you haven't gotten one, please grab one on your way out. This report really looks at the open water, not bays and harbors. So this report is based on the data that has been collected for years by Connecticut State, New York State, and New York City. And the goal of this data is really to look at open water conditions and the important indicators like oxygen and the impacts of nitrogen. So basically what's happened, as you probably are aware, the EPA about a decade ago, in coordination with the 2 states on the Sound, said, you know, we have to do something dramatic to start to cut back on the nitrogen getting into the Sound. So they required that each of the states install new technology in our wastewater treatment plants to treat nitrogen at the plants.
when we built these plants back in the 70s and 80s, we were really focused on fecal bacteria and the impacts of swimming and shellfish and getting sick, being exposed to that. We didn't yet know how dangerous the excess nitrogen was. So the technology that we built, most of our existing plants didn't address nitrogen. So now we've learned this, and we went back to these plants, and over the past decade, they've installed nitrogen treating technology that has brought the amount of nitrogen coming out of the plants in the treated effluent down to 58.5% based on a 1990 base level. So this was, hundreds of millions of dollars that were invested by both states in an orchestrated manner. And what you see here is the beneficial impact on water quality that investments in wastewater treatment make. So at the top, you see the report card scoring system applied to the open water data from 2008, and you see an F in the New York City waterways, going into a D out through the Western Sound, getting into Nassau and Westchester and into some of Connecticut, and then our Bs, and then finally getting up to an A by the open water. Flash forward 10 years after this technology has been coming online, and you see really a dramatic improvement. We still have our F around the city because 58.5% reduction of the volume that they discharge to the Sound. It's still a massive volume of nitrogen. But we've seen a lot of improvement in the region right next to that and going east. So this shows that what we can get done. And honestly, this is a pretty big deal. If you look at urban estuaries around the world right now, many of which are crashing, and you look at stories from, Tampa Bay, Florida, where they have, lost big portions of their tourism and swimming seasons for fish kills. And these are the actions that we've taken to avoid those outcomes. So it could be worse. We're doing some of it right, for sure. So now, after seeing that work happen, EPA went back as we came to the end of getting our wastewater treatment plants upgraded and said, okay, what do we need to do next? We got to keep working on this. We made progress. We got to keep the momentum going. So they released in 2015 a new strategy, an update on the one that required the plant work. And this one has 3 components to it. The first one is reducing nitrogen in our bays and harbors. Because we've learned that you can't necessarily extrapolate those open water conditions into your bay and harbor. They're all their own little system, and they have different water quality conditions. And even though the open water has gotten better in some areas, you could still have very sick water quality condition in an adjacent bay or harbor. So they know we have to tackle that. They made that a top priority. And that's partially what has stimulated a lot of the New York State work Professor Gobler was talking about. Second, they said we got to look at these 3 major rivers in Connecticut because they're pulling nitrogen down from these huge watersheds that go all the way up into Canada. So look at Massachusetts, Vermont, and our upstate communities and work on these rivers. And then finally, back to New York City, because New York City has got to do more on their wastewater treatment. That's still a huge source of nitrogen to the Sound. So they rolled this out to New York and Connecticut, and New York was already talking about the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan because, on the island, as you know, it's not just the Sound. You have your drinking water, you have the South Shore, your county executive has declared nitrogen as enemy #1. So New York was already having this conversation very seriously, and shortly after that last plan came out from EPA, they rolled out the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, which we affectionately call LINAP, and that has 4 components. So one is an assessment. So we have a data gap. We know what the problem is, but there's still a lot more information that is needed to really identify hotspots, sources, technologies. So the first one is working on assessing the state of the pollution. The second one is trying to identify sources. Third is establishing a criteria. So there isn't really a number right now that the state has. They don't have a clear, well, Chris said there are some numbers for the open water, but for these bays and harbors, they need to set specific criteria to reach some goals and then working towards those goals. So that's the state's commitment. So back to the bays and harbors. So the coast around the Sound has these 16 bays and harbors, what we call embayments. So there are these little coastal watersheds that are all fed by a different tributary stream, creek or brook. And as you'll see going back to the report card, where we have the coloring for the grades, it really doesn't go into those bays and harbors because, again, we can't say just because you're out in Stonington Harbor at the East End, where it's an A, that your bay isn't full of algae, because actually the Stonington Harbor Bay is full of algae and is really suffering from low oxygen and has a huge pollution problem. So we want to be sure when we publish this that we don't pretend that we know what's in those areas yet, and this is the work that we're engaged in now that I'm going to tell you about. So in order to address this data gap, Save the Sound has organized a whole network of monitoring groups around the Sound to do a study that we call the Unified Water Study. So there were already monitoring groups in place doing monitoring in some of our bays and harbors, but people were measuring different things, they were measuring them in different ways, and there wasn't comparable apples to apples data. So you could see, how is Oyster Bay doing relative to Northport and, Mamaroneck Harbor and Stonington Harbor. So we designed this study. Right now, it's being conducted in 36 of those 116 bays and harbors, and we count this whole system out here as 6 of those bay and harbor systems. So the study's happening right outside the window. It's also happening down the way in Oyster Bay. Actually, I have a picture of where our locations are coming up. Our collaborating groups are nonprofits like Save the Sound. We also are working with some academic and educational institutions like the Norwalk Harbor's monitoring, the Norwalk Aquarium. We have some government entities. We have some towns with sustainability committees that have stepped up and said they want to participate in the study. And we have some private entities. We have a couple marinas working with us as well. So the way the study works is we provide the training and the equipment. We recently got approved to receive funding from the EPA Long Island Sound Study, and then Save the Sound passes that through to cover the expense that all of the individual groups incur to participate, including insurance. And then everyone goes out in this prescribed way with the same operating plan, the same procedures, and collects the same data. This is going to be our second year doing the full study, and every year it's grown a little more. So here are the 36 locations that we were in 2018. We actually added, this summer we're going to have the Bronx River and Black Rock Harbor in Bridgeport added to it. And everyone monitors for the same parameters. These are the parameters everybody's measuring. We do have a more rigorous version that we call the Tier 2 monitoring that we're adding this summer. And that includes some continuous dissolved oxygen and actually measuring nutrients and quantifying macrophytes. So not every group has the right staff to do that, but we've identified 12 locations, and we have about 5 partner groups that will be doing that with us this summer. So here in the Huntington Northport complex, we love to work with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Suffolk County, their marine program, that's them down in the boat. They're doing an amazing job. This is the sampling map for this area. As you can see, we look at it as 6 different study areas. So they actually, for individual groups, they have the biggest study area that one group is doing. They're doing an amazing job, and actually they're one of our groups that is going to go on to do Tier 2 monitoring. So they'll be installing some buoys to collect continuous DO and doing some nutrient sampling this summer as well. We also have another partner group in the audience. Friends of Oyster Bay is here, and they're one of our groups. There's Heather back there, and Peter Janot is one of their monitors. Thank you guys, terrific partners. Is there anybody else who's working in the study that I don't know is in the room? I think that covers it. So what do we do now? So we built this study. I will say one of the important and exciting things about the study is, when you see what the EPA and our states say, this needs to be done, these are the problems, they're not always that fast, they're not always that agile in being able to get out and address them. So to set up a study like this where you take all these existing groups of knowledge in the community and bring it together in a study, we're really speeding them along. We're saying, you don't have an answer to that question, here's some great data, you can help answer that question, and you know, here are the priority areas. So we can really inform and provide a roadmap to them of where are the real hot spots, keep the momentum going on what they're doing. The next thing after that, in addition to supporting those actions, is we really want to also get it out to the general public. So there are things that are appropriate for EPA, there are things that are appropriate for DEC, but there's also some things that we just need to do as local communities and as private property owners and as citizens. So this is the part that we still need your support in and your engagement, and why, you know, I'm here tonight. So our next step is to take this pretty big data set we have now that we share with anyone who wants it, it's on our website, but to make it grades like you saw in the report card, to make it understandable, A through D, and then to publish in the next report card. So our next report card will have those open water grades, and then it will have like Skittles going around the harbors, and we'll see all these individual water quality conditions. And then once that's out, we'll go out to the public on a local level to the communities that are in the most distress, and support and work with them to find solutions and support solutions that are already underway. There's great work happening, and you'll hear more about it tonight. And then, you know, just keep monitoring, try and get more groups. We also are open to volunteers. The study happens at dawn from a boat. So for any of you early morning people who like to get out at the crack of dawn, literally. I know Cornell Cooperative Extension brings some people out with them. I don't know if Heather could use a set of hands on, yep, Heather and Peter saying yes. So we'd love to have you also participate in the study if you're interested. And then what can we do if we don't love getting up at dawn? That's just not our bag. You can do these tasks that I'm sure you're all familiar with. You know, cut down on your fertilizer use on your lawn or eliminate it. Get involved in this wonderful septic replacement and update programs that are available to you now. And you know, if you are on the municipal line, you know, maintain your pipe, because what's under your private property is still your responsibility. So that's important. If you have to call Roto-Rooter, you know, 3 times a year to go put a drill in and take roots out of your pipe, that means it has cracks in it, and I suggest you get it repaired. These are our partners, leads, and supporters that I want to acknowledge. I'll also mention quickly at this point, we have other volunteer opportunities. We have a whole habitat restoration program, and we're doing a lot of work in the Nissequogue River over here by Sunken Meadow State Park. So if your thing is more getting out and planting, or picking invasive species plants out of the ground, we also do that. So you could follow up with me and my colleague, Andrea Karen is in the back there. You follow up with Andrea as well. And of course, finally, you know, we couldn't do this work without our partners, our volunteers, and also our supporters. So if you're excited about this and think it's a priority, we'd love for you to join us and consider giving a gift or and becoming a member today. So that's it. Thank you.
So this kind of reminds me of the 75th birthday we had for my late father-in-law, the Colonel, very distinguished gentleman, highly revered. And I followed a fellow who was sort of a surrogate son to the Colonel, and he was just so eloquent and so compelling that when it was my turn to follow him, I just came up and went, you know, what Chris and Tracy just said was double for me, and I just sat down. Oops, okay, but I'm going to torture you for just a little while to fill in some of the gaps. And I guess Tracy's still saying thank you over here. Oh, yeah. Okay. You guys are. Okay. Here we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, back to the beginning. So, you've really got an exceedingly thorough tour through what's been going on in this county. Compliments of Dr. Gobler, who I will tell you that we refer to as the Paul Revere of nitrogen loading. And he, from the very outset, as soon as we started cobbling a program together, and I'm not just lathering this guy up, I mean, he's been elemental. He's, incredibly energetic, clearly exceedingly knowledgeable and thorough in his work. And I can say if there's this one person who would get my vote for really the prime mover for what's been going on, it's Dr. Gobler. And I also want to qualify, I don't have any kids that are applying to his school, and I haven't slipped him any money under the table, so he's good in that regard. And the Long Island group is the sound study. I mean, you guys are exceedingly fortunate because this has, in effect, been really the most robust of all the groups that are overseeing our principal water bodies. Down on the South Shore, Dr. Gobler alluded to the fact that at some point, and I grew up on the South Shore going back to the 50s, so a lot of my buddies were baymen. And we did, yeah, we produced well over half the clams that went nationwide, and that's all gone. In part, it's because of, I think, over harvesting, but obviously the efforts to then replenish the waters were stymied by the the salient scientific factors to which Dr. Gobler has alluded. And I'm also going to just throw something else out at you guys. You got clever people here. I'm on the Agricultural Lease Board, which oversees a program that's designed to replenish the peconics with principally oysters, but other shellfish as well. And as I am and have been for the county executive going back to his time in Babylon, his policy guy, and in effect that really means I have to figure out, okay, how do you pay for this, and how do you get people to do it? And those are the heavy lifts, because we are pretty good at identifying the innumerable problems that we face, but now it comes down to crunch time. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's happening. We want to put more oysters, okay, but wait a second. I'm a yacht club, and see that floating gear that you had in one of those pictures back there? My goodness, that's getting in the way of our navigational rights. And our navigational rights have been affirmed going back to the Magna Carta. I'm serious. This is part of the suit that we faced from a certain yacht club. I won't mention their name. Fortunately, we were able to resolve it in an amicable way, but it is the old saw. Yeah, we love aquaculture, just as long as we don't have to deal with floating gear and navigate around it and look at it, all that kind of mean, nasty stuff. So let's be keenly aware that there is a certain amount of sacrifice involved in really realizing these improvements. And while the folks in this room clearly are here because they are aware and because they are engaged and because they want to gain a greater sense of how we move the dial on this, we also have neighbors. Okay, I'm a Great South Bay guy. I'm from West Gilgo Beach. That's the southwesternmost corner of Suffolk County. And I'm living in a homeowners association, 80 houses, and you're always confronted with people who don't trust outsiders, who think government stinks, and who feel that they're paying too much money already. So please do not saddle me with anything more. I mean, the fact at the end of the day that your surface waters are going south on you, and conceivably your property values along with it, well, that's tomorrow. Today, it means I can't buy, Jimmy the, G.I. Joe with a Kung Fu grip. If anybody recognizes that from Trading Places, please raise your hand. Getting back and going through it very quickly, because as I said, I think that my colleagues up here have really done a very effective job of delineating the various issues. When the county executive came to the county, it was $500 million in the hole. When you walked around talking about starting to change things, people looked at you and go, "Oh, you're going to change things? Well, welcome to the county." So you know, this kind of resistance is something that you have to expect to encounter, and then you have to figure out workarounds. And there's an old saw that says you don't go to war with the army that you want, but with an army that you have. I will tell you right now that in putting this program together, we went around and identified the people who wanted to make changes, and the others who just wanted to collect their paycheck and, you know, do their daily job. Oh, great, see you later. So by 2014, we, I think, had really gotten a pretty good momentum. We came up with a comprehensive water management plan. IBM came in and did an evaluation of what we needed to do and what the costs would be, and we already knew that, but having IBM come in and put their imprimatur on it really is, you know, the affirmation of a more, shall we say, a credible outside source. And then moving into 2015, after we did what I call the Magical Septical Tour, which, we went down to Maryland, we went up to New Jersey, we went to Rhode Island, and we went to Maryland, where a couple of Dr. Gobler's systems are being tested, and we met with the pros. We met with the guys who were actually getting into this and getting it done, and as a result, we came up with what was going to be a pilot program at the outset, which entailed, owing to our persuasion with manufacturers of these advanced systems around the country, resulting in approximately 45 systems being supplied gratis to the county, who in turn ran a lottery, and 45 homeowners were the recipients of these souped-up systems at no cost. And it's enabled us to do the kind of testing, again, to which Dr. Gobler refers, which then brings systems, if they happen to break that 20 milligram mark on nitrogen, it's actually down to 19, brings them what's called provisional approval. Dr. Gobler has referred to some of the, I think, systems that they're working on at this point, and having seen them go south of 10 milligrams, which is great, but a number of the existing systems actually get down into the low teens, and when you talk about adding a polishing unit, which is one of the things that features that Dr. Gobler referred to, you're bringing it down now to conceivably in the area of 6 milligrams, and that's a pretty good place to be. So this is the, I think, progress that has occurred, and it then really, I think, led into, and you've seen, and this, again, the disadvantages you have when you're asked to make a presentation is you don't see what your fellow presenters are presenting. So you've already heard the routine on the shellfish landings and how that's diminished to negligible levels. You've seen, as Dr. Gobler described, and by the way, I will add parenthetically here, one of the anecdotes that's related to some of the work he's done, specifically in this case out in Georgia Pond. Now, for those of you who don't know Georgia Pond, those are the swells out there in Waynescott, right? You know Waynescott?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. People who generally are at least like have, what is it, like 12 figures behind their name? Yeah, something of that caliber. So the shock came to Georgia Pond when a Dowager's Russell Terrier succumbed to cyanotoxin ingestion, and that made them realize that even if you have a lot of money in your pocket, you're still subject to the same kinds of ravages that result from not treating your wastewater. And that's, I think, one of the interesting projects that's been occurring on an ongoing basis, and Dr. Gobler has done a considerable amount of work, and there's still work to be done. So you've seen what the nitrogen impacts. What's interesting, I think, when you look at that pie chart up there, is we're looking at approximately 70% on average of wastewater contributing to the nitrogen loading, and there's a big chunk up there for atmospheric deposition. When I go forward a couple of slides, you're going to notice that the number is actually fairly equivalent to what you see out here in Northport. and Huntington harbors. But it's actually a larger number from wastewater, about 75% atmospheric deposition, and in fact winds up being considerably less. And the fertilizer number goes up from 7% to approximately 13%. So those are the two keys. I mean, if you're going to be appointed the king of Suffolk County tomorrow, and you really think you got to do something about this immediately, probably the most immediate would be eliminating nitrogen-based fertilizers. I think that's not an easy lift. Again, you have to realize that there are innumerable Grinches around to steal Christmas from you, even when you think you've come up with an elegant solution, or when you believe there's a solution that's relatively simple. So why should it be a real issue? You know, when you conceivably put less fertilizer, or even better, you put local plantings as opposed to this turf that people favor. But people, as you know, are wedded to their green turf lawns, and the manufacturers who provide the nutrients that make these look more green and more enriched are sitting pretty much in the catbird seat because they're really giving the people what they want. So at some point, like with a lot of other habits that I think we've kind of diminished in the past, it's going to have to turn on the premise that, something is your green lawn, it's just not that cool. So anyway, that's again not something that's going to happen immediately tomorrow. This is the salient statistics. We, as a county, do not treat our wastewater. 74% of homeowners have antiquated cesspools and septic systems, which don't effectively treat for anything. I know that in addition to the concern over nitrogen loading, which is contributed to all the results that Dr. Gobler referenced, we're also in a position where we need to start dealing with emerging contaminants. Adrienne Esposito will obviously speak to that particular premise. But that's another technological aspect of how these systems are developed, and whether in fact we are able to come up with systems that are able to address those issues. So for the purposes, and Tracy really went into this to a certain degree, you can't, as you always hear, manage what you don't measure. So currently the county is conducting a sub-watershed wastewater plan, and this effectively means that we are looking at about 189 sub-watersheds countywide. And what that's going to tell us is where the loading is coming from. And it's going to tell us what the travel time is. And it's going to tell us what the priority areas that need to be addressed. And because with 360 systems out, 360,000 systems out there, you're going to have a loading order, and there are innumerable reasons why that's the case, because even if you snapped your fingers tomorrow, had the money, had the industry, getting those kinds of numbers to be resolved is a huge and heavy lift. Others have not gone to the depth that Suffolk County is currently doing in this particular evaluation. I can tell you, I'm a simple guy. I look at Maryland as we traveled there, and they had a big bay restoration around the Chesapeake, and their approach was fairly simple. Just walk off 200 feet from the surface water body, and all those homeowners, they got to get with the program. This is clearly a more complex and evolved evaluation, in part, it's really attributable to the fact that we have very accomplished scientists, both within the county and in academia, who understand how we need to approach this, because it's going to be incremental. And if you're able to run a program, and I can tell you the Maryland program, where they had a statewide flush tax, and at one point they had a rain tax, so they had a nice little kitty to work with. They still never got above 2,000 installations a year. They have actually more septics and cesspools than we do, about 460,000. So the sub-watershed plan is going to enable us to really both prioritize what we need to do and demonstrate to a lot of different stakeholders why this approach is the sensible approach. Even at that, you can be assured that there is going to be a lot of resistance, and I'm going to leave you with this example because I'm running out of time. But we did start this septic improvement program, and because Suffolk County has been doing, frankly, a real bang-up, comprehensive job of approaching this issue, the state of New York has really signed on and supported us. They recognize that we have a very comprehensive team at all levels, and so they've been very supportive with the Dorian, because that's the big difference. Last year they allocated $75 million over the next 5-year period, and in the first tranche, which was $15 million for septic upgrades statewide, Suffolk County got $10 million plus out of the $15 million. Great. We can do 1,000 systems. We've got a community preservation fund out in Southampton and East Hampton that's putting a lot more money in behind this effort. And lo and behold, what do we see? Another Grinch to steal Christmas. In this case, it was the county controller who, though he had been on notice for well over a year, that the program was structured in a way that the installer received the $20,000, which meant that the homeowner was not in the loop of the money trail. He nonetheless issued 1099s to the installers, and then at the same time issued 1099s, $20,000 worth, to the homeowners as well. It's a little perplexing, particularly when one of the leading issues that most Long Islanders have is the prospect of being taxed. So not only are you now being taxed, but you're being double taxed. So we now have that to deal with, and the problem is not just the 1099s and the onerous burdens that it now puts on homeowners. One example being a 69-year-old lady who put in one of these systems who's on Social Security, who now is bumped up to another tax level. Thank you very much. So it's really a human issue, but you've got a program that is now suddenly getting people who have been signing up, and we had 1,500 people sign up for this, who are now dropping out. I just want to alert you, because if anybody and anything makes a difference, it's the electorate. On that note, I will hand it over to Mr. Milligan. Hopefully he won't take any mulligans.
One more.
Good evening. I just want to thank everyone for coming. It really is important for people to be involved, and there's a couple reasons why, which I'm going to cover in my close. I'm not doing a PowerPoint. I was asked to speak about what's going on in the village that has to do with water quality, and I realize it's actually a lot. We're all very committed. Myself and the rest of the board and our employees are very committed to water quality. We are a waterfront community. Most of us are boaters. We all enjoy the waterfront, so we really are committed. I'm just going to go through some of the things we're doing. One of them, the most obvious, if you saw out in the street, which Mr. Boswick mentioned, is we're doing a wastewater treatment plant expansion. So we're expanding the zone of the wastewater treatment plant to Bluff Point, this area, as well as the all of Steers Pit. So when this project is complete, 100% of our waterfront will be sewered, which is really important. As was mentioned before, there was a 200-foot rule of you have a septic, and most of them are actually cesspool systems, which are even worse. We have a unique situation here because this whole area was a sand mine 50 some odd years ago, and they removed all the sand to make cement in the buildings in New York City. They left behind what they didn't want, which was, they call it birdshot. It's a very fine pea gravel. So what's underneath all these houses is not sand, like in most places, which actually does have some filtering qualities. It's gravel. and it has very little, if no, filtering qualities. And studies have been done that people's wastewater is into the bay inside of 2 weeks. So this really was the most effective area that we could expand our plan. So the project is well underway. There's a lot of people involved. There's been a lot of support from the community, and it really is it's a really good project. That being said, when this project is done, we're not going to stop there. We already are planning other areas to expand. So we are going to keep expanding until we get the most potential out of that plant that we can, and we're even considering expanding the plant again to continue to reach out to eliminate some of these residential septic systems, to get more systems on the sewer. So that is really our goal with that, and we are currently underway on that, including, like Mr. Boswick said, incorporating this building into the system, which is going to be a big plus. So we're really excited about that. The plant itself, and we've talked about this at other ones of these events, a few years ago we were mandated to reduce our nitrogen, as was explained earlier. And I just want to say that actually and you said I think 58% is the average goal. We're actually closer to 75% reduction. So the plant has outperformed its expectations, and it continued to do well. And we still have room for expansion in the plant. So we're really, there's a little bit of doom and gloom. I'm trying to give you some good news, some things that we are, working forward. Another project that we're working on, I brought to the village a couple of years ago, about 1.5 years ago, we had a watershed study done. We paid an engineer to do a study to just identify where all the surface water comes from and goes to. And that was for the purpose of choosing the best locations to install rain gardens. There were 20 locations recommended. We then contracted that engineer to engineer 10 of them. Just very briefly, a rain garden is essentially a biofilter. It's an area that is where you direct water to, runoff water, and you plant local plants that have very deep roots and create a matrix underground that absorbs a lot of water like a sponge, and these are all plants that consume a lot of nitrogen. So these rain gardens are very cost effective. They metabolize nitrogen and filter it before it goes into either our bay or into the groundwater. They have a somewhat limited capacity, but they're designed to take the first ½ inch of rain that falls, and that first ½ inch is what washes the excess fertilizer from people's lawns, the pet and wild animal waste that's found on the roads, and other contaminants that are on the roads get directed into these rain gardens. These rain gardens then metabolize these pollutants, and then the balance of water that goes over that goes into some sort of traditional system like a catch basin. And it really is very effective. It's cost effective. We are going to this year be building 3 of them, one of them just down the road, possibly a 4th. We're already funded and in the works for doing that, and we fully intend on doing all the 10 that we engineered, and then we might look to go further to expand that program as a way to just cost effectively control. Everybody that lives here knows that we have a big issue with flooding on Main Street. It's a safety issue, but as well, it's also an environmental issue because all that water that goes down the street goes directly into the harbor. So if we could capture the beginning portions of that water and process it this way, that's a goal that we are working on. There's a lot of little things that the village is doing for water quality. Simple things like in our parks we have bags for you to pick up your pet waste, and we encourage people both through laws and through opportunity to do that, to pick up after their pets. These are things that we inspire the public to do, and these are things that individuals and the public can do. Of course, fertilizer. We as a small municipality can't do anything to ban fertilizer because you simply would go to the other side of the border and be able to purchase that. But we are instructing our residents to just, if you have to use fertilizer, you read the package and you'll find that most people use too much. We are up to date on our MS4 reporting, which is where we have to monitor all of our outflows, and we have relined all of our storm drains to stop intrusion from residential septic systems. And our mayor is actually currently looking into aquaculture and really wants to bring kelp here to the Northport Bay. So that's something I'd love to talk to you about afterwards. But we are constantly trying to find the next, low-hanging fruit, the thing that's achievable to help to water quality. And everybody here can do things too. And not only just small changes that they do in their lifestyle, but also things that can be done to encourage our public officials to help with the financing. And that just brings me to the last one. We're talking about dredging the harbor. One of the speakers were talking about how Huntington Harbor didn't have the same issues that Northport did for a while. Huntington's considerably deeper and has a lot more flush. Northport Harbor is shallowing out at an alarming rate and really needs to be dredged, both for navigation of boats, but also for environmental. We have a sewer plant here that we're now putting more of a burden on with our expansions. And we've done a great job in drastically lowering the nitrogen output, but we're not seeing the healing of the harbor happen as fast as we'd like because we're not getting that flush. Earlier this week met with the town of Huntington. I've met with Suffolk County. It really is a matter of financing, and that's where you can petition your public officials that we need grant money. We need federal, state money. We need money to filter down to these small municipalities that to do these projects that are extremely expensive. And it is our money. We just want to direct it to the things that are important to us. So by you people being here demonstrates to them that this is important to us. And that is really extremely important. It's probably the most important thing that you've done tonight, by just demonstrating that this is a project that we all really care about. So again, I really thank you coming, and I just wanted to let you know how that really affects and helps us. So thank you very much.
And last but not least, every year I come, and every year they make me go last.
They save the best for last. That's
I think it's some discrimination against short people. That's what I think is happening here. All right, do you have 5 minutes left in you for one last speaker? Yeah. All right, that was pretty good. I'm going to go with that. All right, I'm not even going to use my PowerPoint. Mostly because I had a glass of wine. I'm not even sure. I went backwards. See, that's not mine. Okay. No, that's not really why. It's late. I'm standing between you and your coffee and some delicious looking cakes they brought out. I talk about something no one else did because I knew they were going to put me last, and I knew I did not want to talk about nitrogen and other things because I saw the lineup. I'm going to talk to you about one thing. Not going to use the PowerPoint, which I did prepare, but it'll be a new and different thing. So before you leave, I want you to pick up the shopper's guide on the side there. This is your homework. Look, this is good. This is good. I see energy left. There are several emerging contaminants showing up in Long Island's groundwater. This is a sophisticated audience. You know that 100% of Long Island gets its drinking water from? Aquifer. That is pretty impressive. Don't you think so, Dr. Gobler? He's shaking his head yes. He's like, if only my class was like this. But that's right. So we have 3 million people who live on top of our sole source of drinking water. What could possibly go wrong? So as we know more and we learn more, we understand we have more challenges. There's a new chemical out there. It's called 1,4-dioxane. No, this is not going to be a chemistry class. It's the only chemical name I'm going to use, but it's an important one to know. We started, Citizens Campaign for the Environment started looking at 1,4-dioxane showing up in groundwater throughout Long Island. Some of it was easy to explain, like there was industry over there, and we know that that's where it came from. But there were other little dots too. There was 4 parts per billion, 5 parts per billion, 1 part per billion, 0.55 parts per billion. We're saying, where is that coming from if there's no industry? Then we started reading, well, this is in common household products. It's like, oh my God, we have, which we know, it wasn't really shocking, I'm just pretending. We have cancer-causing chemicals in our common household products. That's not shocking. But
well, let's look at some products. So we go and you look at the back of a product, and guess what? It's not on the ingredient list. This particular chemical, 1,4-dioxane, is not an ingredient. Therefore, it's not legally required to be on the back of the label. It is a byproduct of the manufacturing process, and that's how it ends up in our products. So we combed the literature, we combed it. And we could find some independent testing of products. One was like 10 years ago. But really not a lot of information out there about what is in the products we use every day.
Sorry.
So you sorry? Oh, that's so we wrote a grant to the Long Island Community Foundation, and we said we want to independently test products for 1,4-dioxane, because on Long Island we see little dots of it showing up in our underground water, and whether we have a septic tank or even Suffolk County has how many, Dorian? 183 little package plants, sewage treatment plants that discharge into groundwater?
153.
153. Did you lose some? It was 173 2 years ago when I read the report. I guess some closed down.
Well, you're probably including the major sewage treatment plants as well.
Okay, well anyway, we have a lot of sewage treatment plants, many of which, over 100, that discharge to groundwater. So when we use products like shampoo and laundry soap and bath gels and baby products that have 1,4-dioxane, where does it go? It goes down the drain, goes into the septic, goes into a sewage treatment plant. Sewage treatment plants do not filter out 1,4-dioxane. Matter of fact, we'll get to this in a second, neither does your water supplier company. So, we started saying, how many products have 1,4-dioxane? So, long story short, we independently tested 80 products for 1,4-dioxane. Laundry soaps, shampoos, bath gels, baby products. What we found was rather disturbing. Well, I can tell you for one thing, we finally found out Victoria's secret. The secret is she's poisoning us. I could probably get sued for saying that. But we tested 2 Victoria's Secret's bath gels. One was called Live. The other one was called, I think it was called Danger. No, it wasn't. It was called, Bombshell. Now, as I give you these, I just want you to know, there is not a drinking water standard established for 1,4-dioxane. But the state of New York has gone through a year-long process of looking at the scientific literature and has proposed a drinking water standard of 1 part per billion. That number again was 1 part per billion. They're supposed to adapt that this year. Well, Victoria's Secret, Bombshell, has 17,000 parts per billion in the bath gel, 16,000 in Live. Tide, come on, tell me the truth. We're all friends here. Who uses Tide? Not anymore. Yeah, everyone. It's true. It's true. And thank you for the 3 brave people who raised their hands. I appreciate that. But Tide, 15,000 parts per billion. It was the highest. Actually, we tested 2 different brands. One came up with 15,000. The other one was about 11,000. It's all in your shopper's guide that you're going to take home. Parts per billion. Now, keep in mind, as we're using these products, and we're sending 15,000 parts per billion down into the septic or into the sewage treatment plant, which is not filtering it, and it's ending up in our groundwater, then when the water supplier brings that water up, they do not have the technology to filter this. 1,4-dioxane, as it turns out, is very challenging to filter out. They need a special technology called an AO, or Advanced Oxidation Technology. Very expensive. It's not even on the market. In fact, Stony Brook University is piloting and is having a lot of success with this technology, but it's not like you can just go buy it off the shelf. People have been calling my office, what kind of home filter should I use for 1,4-dioxane? I said, it's not on the market yet. So, we just want to tell you about some of the surprising things we found in this particular study. Dreft. Anybody here use Dreft when your babies were born? Pediatricians across America. We got heads saying yes. Recommend Dreft as the detergent of choice for stage 1 newborn infants. 10,000 parts per billion. What about baby bath? You think those things have to be pretty clear, right? Pretty okay? Not so much. Baby Magic, 7,600 parts per billion, which we consider crazy. So we're filling up a bathtub, and we're putting some Baby Magic in there because it makes bubbles and it makes the baby smell nice, and there's 7,600 parts per billion of 1,4-dioxane. So, you know, I had a snarky reporter, who I won't say who it was, but I could tell you later, asked me, said, well, so what's the standard on dermal exposure? You know, I mean, I understand it gets into drinking water, we shouldn't drink it, but you don't really drink it in your bath. And I said, okay, well, there are no standards for dermal exposure. We looked all over again in the scientific literature. There is a European recommendation of not being exposed to any more than 10,000 parts per billion. So he said, well, the 7,600 is less than that. I said, yeah, but 10,000 parts per billion is for a grown-up, not for an infant. Plus, let me tell you another thing. I mean, I don't want to get too personal here, but normally when people take a shower, you wash your hair, and you use some soap, some bath gel. Even men. Okay, we tested 5 or 6 men's products here. Dove's men's bath gel, Axe, that new thing, Axe. I don't know, whatever. I know, the kids use it, all the teenagers use it. But we have multiple exposures every day. So you take a shower, you wash your hair, you got 5,000 parts per billion here, get some bath gel, 7,000 parts per billion there. You go downstairs, you wash the dishes with the dish soap, another 4,000 parts per billion there. Then you wash your hands after you use the restroom, another 6,000 parts per billion, and the hand soap there. We're constantly exposed. One product after another. In fact, we were very shocked because after we tested 80 products, 80% of all the products had detectable levels of 1,4-dioxane. I do want you to know there's a little bit of good news. We did find some, we're calling them the Clean 15, that had no detect. You know, things like in Stop and Shop, you go and they have Nature's Promise. Apparently, nature has kept her promise. There was no detects. Method, that brand Method, no detects. Burt's Bees, gotta love Burt's Bees. Aveeno, which doesn't even market itself as a pure and natural, we tested a baby product and we tested a hand soap, no detect. So there's a whole list of things you can use. 7th generation came out really good, in case you want to know that. But again, it's, you know, it's only 20% out of the 80. So the bottom line for us is that we're working right now very hard in Albany. There's a bill that we crafted and that Senator Todd Kaminsky and Assemblyman Engelbright have introduced to ban 1,4-dioxane from common household products. We feel, I'm going to knock on wood a little bit, that we can get this bill passed this year. It's an important bill because not only do we think you should have dermal exposure, and not only do we think we shouldn't be bathing our babies in 1,4-dioxane, but then to clean it up from our groundwater, why should we incur that expense? We've had some people say, well, is it going to make our products go up? And I'm saying, well, if your products don't go up, then your drinking water is going to go up because the water suppliers did a press conference last month. You might have saw the cover of Newsday. They're projecting it's going to cost $840 million to filter out 1,4-dioxane from our drinking water supply. I think they inflated it because they're suing the companies, but that's a sidebar off the record. But it's going to cost something. So the best way for us to be safe is to take it out of the products. Some companies do. They do that already. You can filter it out before the product is finalized. The FDA has an advisory rule where they advise companies to do that, but it could be mandatory. Senator Schumer wrote, and actually Senator Gillibrand, both co-authored a letter last year asking the FDA to make it mandatory, and the FDA, not so gracefully, declined to do so. They said, we think the companies are trying. We don't know what that means after we found this out. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, to let you know that helping to choose products also that are low in contaminants is not only good for you and your health, but it's also good for the drinking water and for coastal water. Suffolk County started to do more and more tests in our tributaries and coastal water areas, and they're finding, not surprisingly, 1,4-dioxane. So we also can make a difference by the products that we choose. Thank you so much for staying awake.
Thank you all very much. That was really very, very informative. We're going to have a question and answer period now. But before we start, I just want to do a shout out to some friends from the League of Women Voters that are here, that are taking our presentations and going to go public with it on their own facilities and educational television shows. And I'd like to thank the president of the League of Women Voters for Huntington, Colette Knuth. Are you here, Dr. Knuth? And Brenda Walker, who's taking our film. Thank you. Okay, well, any questions from the floor? Yes.
Just have a question, if you could define the atmospheric deposition was in your pie chart as one of the contributing factors, 41%.
Okay, so 79%, does this thing work?
79%.
Yeah.
79% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. That's,
Okay,
so when it rains,
Okay, so
there's
that's
where the nitrogen comes from.
not emissions of any kind.
Well, it's
The answer is no.
principally atmosphere.
Yes? Dennis?
Could you update us on the, a couple of years ago it was presented about the oysters and the oyster farm and the experiment in Huntington. Is there any results of that? Has it, anybody even knowledgeable about that?
We'll pass that over to Ian, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with that program. They do have it's called FLUPSY. They have a couple of programs going on. I'm really not familiar. That's not my area of expertise. I do know it is I believe it's Cornell Cooperative that's working on it. It's an ongoing project. And like I said, Damon McMullen, Northport Village Mayor, has been doing a lot of research and has contacts with kelp farming, is hoping to try and introduce that here. We've heard about some of the benefits of that. So that's something that we are looking at in Northport. Of course, it would be Huntington, though, because it's Huntington waters.
Is there anybody here who is from Huntington who would like to speak to that?
Supervisors.
There's a supervisor, Lupinacci. Thank you for coming.
Ian was right with the Cornell Extension Cooperative, so we're always working along with them and want to continue to expand the program. And then Congressman Suozzi also hosted something, I think you weren't there, right? The mayor was there when over in Oyster Bay, talking about the kelp farming and trying to locate different areas within the congressional district where they can begin the kelp farming to really help with water systems. So he's looking at federal funding to help along with areas in willing jurisdictions. Huntington would be part of that. Northport was very willing, whatever ways we can expand that too.
Thank you. Up there. She beat you to it.
If they dredge, where do they put the spoil?
Can you speak louder?
I can replace that. The question was if they dredge, where will they put the spoils? Well, for dredging in Northport Harbor, the spoils are not eligible for mid-south dumping, even if that is going on. I know that's still very controversial, but it was never eligible for that because of some of the, like the Alexandrian cyst that exists. The dredge materials have to be placed up on land to de-water and then be trucked away, take to approved site. It's one of the reasons why it's so costly. It's an expensive process, but it is because of the regulations that we have with DEC. That is really the biggest stumbling block in getting the dredging done. But it would be taken upland to approved site.
And I just want to say we've had multiple meetings about it and trying to work it out. Congressman Suozzi has brought together several roundtable discussions to try to work it out. It's very challenging.
What about Phragmites Park? That was designated as a location.
No, nothing's been designated, but we're looking at areas that would be acceptable. There's certain criteria, guidelines that the DEC lays out for you, so that there are nothing has been designated, but that is what we're looking to do now.
Okay, I thought it was approved by the DEC.
Oh, no. It was suggested but not approved.
And it also has to do with state legislation. In order for even something to be considered like Phragmites Park, it's alienation of parkland, because even putting dredge spoils there for a period of time would require 2 legislative votes in 2 consecutive years by the legislature. So even if we were to look at that as a designated area with cooperating with Northport and the surrounding neighbors, it still has to go through 2 successive votes in the state legislature in order for the alienation of parkland. Even though the dredge spoils would only be there for a temporary period of time, it's still considered alienation of parkland in the state law.
So, and that's not possible?
It would be possible. It would be a 2-year venture that would have to look at, in terms of coordinating those spoils.
I see. Okay, thank you. Rich?
A couple things. One, the Northport Yacht Club is in the process of discussions with the Cornell Cooperative for participating in that program. So we're in the discussion with that. Second, thank you for talking about the dredging. I think that's very, very, very important. And the third is, what is septic tank maintenance? We all have them, and usually it's, well, if it overflowed, I better call the guy. There's got to be something better than that. So can someone address that?
Dorian, that sounds like you.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Roto-Rooter here to offer you the insight. So there are conventional septic systems. They have been required by law on new installations since '73. Remarkably, you have been able, since that time, to replace cesspools in kind until July of this coming year. That will no longer be allowed. So in conventional cesspools and septics, it's, call your cesspool guy to pump it out when your, crap is backflowing into your, bottom
Isn't
floor.
there something we should do in the meantime?
So part of the, I think, challenge, frankly, is in conventional cesspools with cesspool operators. They will come in and suggest that you blow out your system with sulfuric acid. That in turn creates just another contaminant that we have to contend with. With the advanced systems that we are now installing under the guise of what's called the responsible management entity that's supervised by the Department of Health, you get 3 years of maintenance subsequent to the installation of these advanced systems, and then it is serviced on an annual, sometimes biannual basis. So they both ensure that the biota is eating away all the bad stuff in there, and then when the sludge gets to a certain level, then it's removed. And this is something we're very intent upon pursuing, because Maryland, for example, had an upgrade program, and then they just dropped the ball after they put the little black boxes in to denitrify. They never had any kind of oversight or annual requirement. The cost has been estimated to be about $300 or $400 a year. To contextualize that, the average sewer connection in the Southwest Sewer District is at this point $550, after having been as high as $750, $800 over the course of time. So yeah, folks are going to have to pony up. And I just want to leave you with one kind of interesting data point. We secured a fair amount of money to extend sewering in the Great South Bay, almost $400 million, and the premise was based upon nitrogen loading undermining wetlands, which in turn were reduced to such a degree that when you get storm surge, it causes all sorts of damage. By eliminating the source of that degradation, you in turn will have more robust defenses against storm events. So that's how we secured that money. And so we had 3 areas that were designated for upgrades. Connection extensions in Wyandanch, which is the single most economically challenged area in all of Long Island, Mastic Beach, which isn't too far behind in the economically challenged area, and Great River, which is a middle-class, fairly solid community. Wyandanch 85%, Mastic 87%. In favor? Great River? The deeper pockets? 56%? No. Why? Because it's found money, ladies and gentlemen, but you are going to pay the $700 ad valorem per annum. Well, hey, why us? So this is, I've suggested before, one of the huge challenges in really realizing the kinds of efforts we need to achieve over the course of time.
But is there anything that those of us that live in Northport, that have a house that's maybe 100 years old, and the septic tank that we have is original, then we had an overflow put in maybe 25 years ago, what is the maintenance that we should be doing?
Well, I would suggest, frankly, given the fact that the combination of county and state are basically ponying up the full expense for one of these systems, and doing that, ignoring the controller's ill-advised recommendation to really respond to the 1099s that he's dispatching, which means effectively that you really don't owe that tax, and that will be borne out. You get yourself a system that in part can then be attached to the leaching system that you already have, and you now are on this advanced system, and you are in a program that will be addressing on an ongoing basis the maintenance of that system so that it's performing properly.
So what Dorian is saying is right now there are grants up to $25,000 per home. That number again is $25,000 per home to put in the new innovative technology that actually treats your system, it treats your wastewater. It's the year 2019. We think sewage should be treated before it goes into the ground or into the bay. And these grants are easy to get, especially for areas like this, because you're in what's called a priority area, because you're so close to the bay. You fill out the application online. It populates the state grant system and the county, and it's $20,000. And then if you have a leaching thing, it's another $5,000. And I'm just saying it's free money. The state just approved another tranche, what's called, of funding, $85 million for the whole state, but Suffolk should get that too. But the grants won't last forever, so get them while they're free.
Yeah, in effect, all you're obliged to do is pay for the design costs, which, by the way, you don't have to do in other states. This is another idiosyncrasy of New York, design, build, yada, yada, yada. Realize that if you put in a new cesspool, for example, it will cost you about $3 grand. You're not going to be able to do that anymore. The conventional septic systems are minimum 6. They run upwards to 12. So you really are on the precipice of really good deals, and get them while they can, because they're not going to continue forever.
And I was going to say, the councilwoman made a good point. She said, I thought they were $10,000, and they were, and they went up in January. Usually grants go down. These grants went up to $20,000. That's why the number changed.
Thank you very much. And I'll just add that no matter what, if you have a conventional system, no matter what you do, you cannot reduce, you're not going to eliminate nitrogen discharge, right? Even if you maintain it and get it pumped once a year, it's still, all that does is do with the solids. And again, as I said in my presentation, all the nitrogen in the liquids, and so as long as the liquids are spilling out, you're contaminated with nitrogen, no matter how good or bad you are maintaining that system. So just echoing what's been said here, really, if you want to make a difference, it's really about getting one of these new systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay,
I had a question for Adrienne.
Yes.
Well, you were talking about this, what's getting into our, through the different products and everything. What now? It's a cancer causing?
Yes, I should have said that. 1,4-dioxane is listed by the US EPA as a likely carcinogenic, which means likely to cause cancer.
Oh.
It's associated with liver cancer as well as, I think it was gallbladder.
So, can you get test strips if you want to test items at
No,
home?
it's called the hidden carcinogenic because there's no way to know. And that's why we went out and actually spent a lot of money on testing. We used a New York State certified laboratory for this testing because there was no other way. People kept calling our office, how do I know if it's in the product? How do I know? We're like, we don't know. So it was really to
Somebody
provide
should make up a
answers.
test strip, right, over there that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you have a whole generation.
Yeah.
You have a whole generation that are doing Tide Pod challenges. So maybe we just take the kids that have been consuming those and test them for the results.
1,4-dioxane. I'm sorry.
Spell that, D-I.
D-I. I want you to get the sharpest guy. D-I-O-X-A-N-E.
Thank you.
Dioxane.
So we're gonna like, test some other products too, keep it going?
No, this was a lot. It was a lot of money to test 80 products.
It is a lot.
It is a lot. So no, we're not planning on testing anymore. We're planning on banning it from the product so that you don't need to worry.
That would be.
That's our goal.
Can I say? Yes, Mary.
And Adrienne,
Yes.
Your petition to ban.
Yes.
You have a petition out.
Yes.
Is there any way, do you get access to that on the internet?
We don't have an internet one, but we can certainly send one to the yacht club and they can circulate it for us. We have literally thousands. I don't even know what the current number is, but we're doing a letter writing and a petition drive, and we're getting I feel good about it this year. So we'll keep you posted, though.
Okay.
One quick, I'm a loyal Tide user. Oh my gosh, changing
Oh, no!
everything. Oh, I know.
I like you anyway.
Is it worth it to contact the company?
Yes, actually, that is a very good idea. I don't know if you could grab this on your way out, but you'll see there's two different brands of Tide that we tested. Tide Original is 14,000, and then Tide Simply, it's not so simple, and that was 8,300. So yeah, it's definitely worth it.
Okay.
Question about, you mentioned with the 1,4-dioxane, eventually getting into our water supplies. Has anyone tested our water supplies for this?
Yes.
To know what those levels
Yes,
are?
actually there has. And if you get this on the back here, well, this is how we first got into this issue. The EPA has what's called a list of emerging contaminants, where they're like, they're not really sure, is it in your water, is it not in your water? So they mandated a number of different water suppliers test once over a 5-year span. So we gathered up all that data, and we looked at it, and we thought, and it was 4,400 databases from across the nation. Guess who had the highest levels of 1,4-dioxane of anywhere else in the nation? Long Island. And so that's what made us a little bit crazy about it. We're like, oh my God, part of it's because we have a sole source aquifer, but even in other aquifer areas, they didn't have as high as levels as we did. So the biggest, the highest level was in like Hicksville, it was 33 parts per billion. There were a number of places that had hits of 12 and 10 and 8 and 9. And so we used that data and actually launched the campaign and said to the state, you need a drinking water supply, because that's the thing about emerging contaminants. There's no drinking water standard, I meant to say, sorry. You need to create a drinking water standard, and we need to get it out of products, and we need to filter it out. So we need to filter out what's there, and we need to prevent additional contamination from occurring.
Yes?
Yeah, Adrienne, are the various water districts throughout the island required to publish the levels of 1,4-dioxane?
You know, that's an excellent question. They're not even right now required to test. Many of them do, particularly the Suffolk County Water Authority has been testing. But because it's still considered an emerging contaminant, there's not a legal requirement for them to test. Now, they are, many of them. I don't know about, in Nassau County, there's 51 water suppliers, and I can't speak to what every one of them is doing. But no.
One more question, Adrienne. Is it unique to Long Island to have water from a sewer treatment plant that enter the drinking water, or does everybody do that everywhere?
Well, everyone does it everywhere, I would say. However, so let's take the Great Lakes. You know, Great Lakes, 20% of America's fresh drinking water supply. We love the Great Lakes. You know, but basically there's a lot of sewage that we pour right into that. But there's a lot of dilution that occurs there also. What happens when you're in a sole source aquifer is there's not a lot, there's a little bit of what's called natural attenuation, which just means dilution. Because the water moves slowly in an aquifer as compared to a lake or a river or a stream. where there's a lot more, fluid motion. So it makes us, bottom line is it makes us more vulnerable and susceptible to concentrations of contaminants building up and up. Good question there.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Gobler. He spoke of PSP affecting shellfish in Northport Harbor. What is the status of the shellfish in Northport Harbor? Can it be eaten? There's clam diggers out every day that are taking both clams and oysters, and what is the status of that?
That's a good question, and I probably should have given a little bit more information. So, PSP is a seasonal occurrence. So right now the shellfish are fine, but we actually are moving towards the season when there is a risk. It's usually something like May and June. So the DEC has begun their weekly monitoring program. They actually have deployed in Northport, several locations across Northport Harbor, Bay, Huntington Harbor. They deploy blue mussels. They retrieve them every week and they test them. And they have a safety factor built in, so if they get to what the US FDA tells them is above the federal closure limit, they will close that water body. So, the bad news is it was detected here first. The good news is there's more monitoring sites around here than anywhere else in New York State. The DEC really is focused to make sure that there's nothing, that there isn't an accident here. So the shellfishing's open in most areas, but if there's a closure, they'll announce that, and they have ways of contacting the bayman.
I just want to add to that, just to clarify, there is no shellfishing in Northport Harbor. Northport Harbor is closed to shellfishing. So and that's where this was detected. The shellfishing is out in the bays, and the bays are routinely tested. And there are sometimes closures. Sometimes we get a heavy rain and they'll do a closure that might be closed for a week, but it is very heavily tested and monitored. So it's just as safe as any shellfish anywhere else, but there still is always a risk. So.
Are there any more questions?
I have a question for Dr. Gobler. I've been coming here and listened to presentations about the septic systems. Now, how does this new system with the wood chips, what is the process there and how does it work?
So the wood chips promote this chemical process called denitrification. And so the systems have two sections to them, one of just sand, which promotes one chemical transformation. Most of the nitrogen coming out of the septic tank is in the form of ammonium. The sand converts that ammonium to nitrate, and then the wood chips create an environment that reduces oxygen levels to nearly zero. And when there's no oxygen present, the bacteria then take the nitrate that's there and convert it to nitrogen gas via this process called denitrification.
And the nitrogen gas escapes to the atmosphere?
Correct, that's right.
Where it should be.
I think it's all getting kind of late if we don't have too many more questions. Are there any urgent questions we want? One or two? Okay, all right, thank you.
We just wanted to wrap up, so if you could just have your attention just for another minute. There's just some people in the audience that we wanted to thank.
So on behalf of the Northport Yacht Club and the Women's Committee, we'd like to thank, of course, our esteemed panel that helped us tonight. And we want to thank you for being here tonight as well, because without you, this change and what's happening and the studies that are going on, we can't disseminate that information. So we really appreciate that as well. We want to thank our flag officers, our Board of Governors, and the Northport Yacht Club, and our manager for supporting this event for the past 5 years. The League of Women Voters for filming tonight's event, Peggy Doherty for the publicity, Terry Breen, Liz Frank, Betty Vanini, and Christine Going for helping us check everybody in, Marianne Munch for IT expert and the evening tent cards, event tent cards, Stan Goulston for the graphic work on the flyers, and Marie Thayer for our timer. But really, we would like to really thank Stephanie Quarles, and a big round of applause for Stephanie for really spearheading this event. She really worked on the publicity and working with us as the Northport Yacht Club and the Women's Committee and the Greater Huntington and Yachting Boating Council, and pulling this all together year after year. So again, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everybody.